Carlos Nelson with Cascade Media, and today we have, I'd like to say, one of my friends on, but he's really just an associate. Mr. Roosevelt Lyons, previous head of Parks and Rec here in Kansas City, and now we've got him on the show. I want to see what is he into now. Welcome to the show, Roosevelt.
Well, thank you for having me. And we are friends, Carlos. So I don't know why you're playing.
I like that. Hey, Roosevelt, give our community an update on what you're doing
Sure.
right now.
Yeah, so I am currently the Vice President of Advocacy for an organization called Quality Schools Coalition. And Quality Schools Coalition, we are a statewide advocacy organization. So we advocate to improve the Missouri public school system. And what we do is really we try to advocate for kind of systemic level, policy level change, normally over at Jeff City. So we're talking about a lot of legislation is what we do. And our real goal is really to affect the overall public school system. So we don't, we don't have any favorites. We don't, whether you're a charter school or a traditional public school, whether you're an urban school or rural school, suburban school. We don't kind of pick winners and losers. Our goal is really to improve the overall system that all public schools are under, so that all of them can thrive and that all of our students have a high quality education. And we do that through kind of three ways. One of the biggest things we do is work on legislation. So we're up at Jeff City a lot, and I'll talk about kind of what my role is here in a second. We work with our legislators on specific legislation. We work in the kind of electoral arena, so we also try to find and support candidates who are interested in running, and education and improving education is one of their goals. So we try to work with those candidates as well. And kind of our third bucket is we work with regulators, so those who kind of help make the rules for our state education system. We try to work with them. And in my role as Vice President of Advocacy, I always tell people I have the best job, is because what I do is I go out there and I try to engage stakeholders and get them involved in the process. So I say I have kind of three jobs. One is I go out there and I inform as many people as I can, both about the current state of education and about some of the proposed changes that we would like to see. And I do that, and I drive all across the state. I spend a lot of time here in Kansas City and a lot of time in St. Louis mostly. And I go and I talk to parents, I do presentations, I've been to, church meetings, I'll go anywhere where there's a group of stakeholders or parents or community members who are interested in just learning about what's going on. And I do that in a way that's not trying to sell you anything. We believe that everybody should kind of know what's going on with Missouri's education system and legislation. The second thing I do is I try to gather feedback from those community members and stakeholders about their experience with public education, what's affecting them. Like I said, we work on legislation, so I try to gather feedback from them about our legislation, but also about future legislation that they feel would be beneficial to their community. And then the third thing I do is try to find advocates, people who feel strongly, who want to get involved in the process, who want to have their voices heard. My goal is to really give them tools to get involved, whether that's taking a trip up to Jeff City, whether that's calling a legislator, whether that's organizing a parent group themselves. I try to find those advocates and trying to give them the tools so that they can do whatever it is, get engaged, however it is they see fit. So that's kind of my job. Like I said, I spend a lot of time here in Kansas City. We're all based here in Kansas City. But I spend a lot of time in St. Louis, and then I spend some other time kind of outside those areas as well.
Do you work any with Kelvin Simmons? He's down there in Jeff City and in St. Louis and what have you as lobbyists.
We don't work with Kelvin Simmons. We have a number of lobbyists, but Kelvin is not one of them. And I should also say we are a bipartisan group, so we work with both Democrats and Republicans, legislators, so we don't work with Kelvin, but we work with a lot of some other consultants as well as all the legislators there.
What legislation are you working on right now? and explain to our community a little bit about this legislation deal. Because from my perspective, in our community, the minority community, you're representing the whole educational system, but we're a Black media company. I'm concerned with what's going on in our community. And I see in our community, it seems like we don't understand that the marches and the protests and all of that really doesn't amount to anything unless you can change the legislation and you can change the laws and what have you. And so, what are you working on right now, and how important is that to uh, uh, have our community understand what that's all about? And it seems like you're on the big, gigantic public relations. You say you all over. You're in the churches, you're in the schools, you're in the PTA meetings, and so forth. So, give us a little bit of what you're talking about when you addressing these people.
Yeah, so I'm going to say a few things. One is, I think you're absolutely right. So, one of the things that I really strive for in my job in this role, and one of the things that attracts me to this role is, in my role of bringing people to, not just bringing to the people to the table to, have their voices heard, which is important, right? But I think that's oftentimes where we stop, right? We get a bunch of people in a meeting, we talk about stuff that needs to change, everybody gets excited, and then we all go back home and do all the things we do, which is, which is all important. It's hard, right? It's hard to squeeze all this in, right? To change a community, to do all the work. So yeah, I think throughout my career and in this job specifically, I've really been about taking that next step and like, how do you actually make this happen beyond the rhetoric, beyond the symbolism, right? But what actions do you need to take, like in that, and giving people concrete things to do, legislators to call, organizing visits to the Capitol, helping. We're gonna have a big process this summer where we're going to be inviting the community in to actually help us write some legislation. So giving people concrete things to do beyond just, getting mad and getting upset and then like, going home is really, I love that about my job. And I wouldn't take in these roles, this role that, these advocacy roles, it's very easy to fall into that trap of just engaging people, informing them, you tell them what's going on, and then you say, all right, thanks. We'll let you know. Um, so I'll just start kind of high level and talk about kind of our three top priorities, and I'll talk about the one that we are specifically working on right now. I'll start on the kind of our number three is public school choice. So we are a school choice organization. What we mean by that is we just want parents to have the options to find the best high quality school for their student, for their kid. I would not have considered. I'm a I work for the DNC for a little bit, and I consider myself a liberal. And this actually challenged me a little bit when we talk about public school choice because it's often something that's seen as a more conservative kind of idea. But as I travel the state and over in St. Louis, and if you think that Kansas City has some problems, if you go over to the St. Louis side, it's a whole new ball of wax over there. But this school choice, when I talk to parents who feel like they are trapped in their current school that's not serving their student, that may be unaccredited and they don't have options, that was really scary and eye-opening for me. So public school choice is one of our objectives. Fair, equitable, and adequate funding is another one. So we want to revise the K through 12 public school funding formula. And so one of our goals are for overall per pupil public education funding to be in the top 20. Right now, Missouri is in that bottom. We're in the 40s, low to mid 40s when you compare us to other states. So we want to be in that top 20.
What is it? Do you know who's in the top 20? Can you name just
Oh no.
give
Oh no, I cannot. But I can follow up with an email and kind of give you that information. But a lot of the East Coast states are in that top 20. And I can tell you that, per pupil funding correlates really highly with student outcomes, right? So we know that you pay for what you get. We all know that. So when you're in the
Sometimes you
bottom,
pay and don't get what you pay for.
sometimes you get what that is absolutely true. But here in Missouri, we are overall one of the lowest states for per pupil public education funding. We want to also be in the top 20 for average teacher pay. Again, we're in that bottom to mid 40s when we're compared to other states. And then probably one of the most important is supplemental funding for low income students. So we believe that those low income students who face more barriers, we should actually be giving more funding to those schools that are actually taking on those students, and they shouldn't be penalized, which is kind of what's happening right now. And then one of the biggest ones, the ones that we're working on right now for this year, is actually improving Missouri school accountability system. So, and our goal is to do two things. We want to first just change what we measure. So we're measuring what matters. So right now, schools all get a grade, they get accredited. A lot of that is based off of paperwork that the schools are doing, and it's not really based off of how students are doing. So less than 50% of a school's overall rating is actually based off of how students are doing. So if I told you like we're going to go play a basketball game and we're going to, and even though you score the most points, we're not actually going to, that doesn't actually determine who wins. It's all this other paperwork. It's if your coach did the paperwork and everything that actually determines who wins. So we want to change that so that a bigger chunk of how a school is graded is actually based off of student performance, and specifically student growth. So student growth is something that we really emphasize, and that all the data shows is what we should be focusing on. And then you're gonna say, what does that mean? Student growth is a way of measuring how students are doing. So there's kind of two ways we do that, and I'm gonna get all technical, so sorry. One is achievement. So that's where students are coming in. Are they on grade level? Is my third grader on grade level? So that's one way we measure. The other one is if a student isn't on grade level, how much did they grow in that school year? And that is actually the biggest indicator of how well a school is doing. It's also a big deal because we know that after the pandemic, students are behind. So we need to be focusing on growing students. We also know that Black and Brown students are coming in behind as well. And there's lots of schools, a lot of them here in Kansas City, and also at the Kansas City Public Schools District, who are growing students faster than some of our suburban school districts, but they don't always get credit for that. So they're taking those students who are coming in fourth grade, maybe they're only reading at the first grade reading level, and they're taking them and they're getting them up to the third grade reading level, which is a big deal. But they're not always getting credit. In fact, they actually get dinged because that student isn't at fourth grade yet. So one of the goals we have is really making sure that schools take the time to grow students, that get rewarded, and then we tell the whole story about how schools are doing, because we always get these labels about, oh, urban school districts aren't doing this or not doing that, and when in fact they really are growing students at a pretty fast rate. And then the other thing it does is we really want to create some transparency for parents with a clear grading system for all schools. So that's, again, charter and public schools, everybody should get a clear, we've been advocating for a clear letter grade, like an A through F for every school, so that parents can easily look and compare schools and see how they're doing. It doesn't have to be an A through F. It could also be some kind of descriptive language like excellent, meets expectations, these kind of things. But we know that parents have a really hard time figuring out how their school is doing right now. So it's not an easy process, and it's not easy on purpose. It's not easy on purpose, right? So it's made that way, so it's very difficult for parents and other stakeholders to get the information they need. So
Leaves a
our
lot
goal
of
is
gray area.
it does.
When I do anything and I talk to people on any type of subject, I usually say, "Well, how are you doing?" And I say, on a 1 to 10 scale. I want don't just tell me we good on a 1 to 10. Tell me. Now, I want to ask you this. We've been doing a series of interviews with 50 of the top Black educators that have been inducted into the Wichita Black Educators Hall of Fame. And between the 50, they've had 1,000 years of experience. All of them have been superintendents, principals, 50 years in the education system, right? and to somewhat peel the onion back. And nowadays, we have more Hispanics now, the Latin population in our schools, and how that's the largest growing population. How do what you do affect them, and give us a little something on that?
Yep. So we actually work really closely with some Latinx organizations. RevEd is a big partner of ours to make sure that we include a lot of those parents from the Latinx community in this process, helping us with this legislation, reaching out to legislators. So we have some really good partners that help us with that. When we often talk about, Black students. So I'll give you just this number. So in Missouri, only 4 in 10 students are reading on grade level by the 3rd grade. So 4 in 10. That's not good. Only 1 in 10 Black students are reading on grade level by the 3rd grade. We don't even measure, we don't even report out in a meaningful way the number of Latinx students who are reading on grade level. So that's a big deal. And that's something that I hear all the time from our Latinx parents, like, hey, we are one of the fastest growing population. Our kids are going to school. What can we, like, how come we're not getting in here? How come we're not getting the credit? And I would say our current bill does a couple of things. By focusing on student growth, it actually focuses specifically on both low income students and also English language learning students, and gives those schools that take on those students are actually worth more. So we know that those students, again, have more barriers. If you're learning English, you're probably not going to be on grade level, but those schools shouldn't be punished for taking on those students. So our goal is to make sure that we recognize the work that those schools are doing with those students. And then also, as we're talking about, that kind of fair, equitable, and adequate funding, obviously overall per pupil funding was going to be good for all schools, but specifically supplemental funding for low income students is going to be extremely important as well. And we know that also that additional funding helps fund things like ELL programs for those English language learners. And that's not to say that all Latinx students are ELL students, because they're not. But we know that there's a growing population there.
I'm working with Genesis here, and I didn't realize, because education, you like, schools are schools to a degree, but when you have these schools with these type populations, there definitely needs to be an increase in funding for certain student populations. Because if I'm reading at 1st grade and I'm in the 5th grade, it takes more resources to deal with that. And in today's real life, not the fake life,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of our parents, from a financial standpoint, don't have the resources. Kids going to school without meals. I know extended day is major for a lot of families, and to have the type of activities that are going to improve their overall education, it costs money. It costs money to have the right teachers in there, the right equipment, and so forth. So I'm glad to see and to know that what you're doing and how that is affecting the educational system. In closing, what would you have to say to our parents? Also, I want to ask you, how important do you think digital communications for our community is, and to be plugged in? Because I believe, like with this show, information applied is power. Information by itself is just information.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to get the results to change the laws and what have you, first of all, you've got to have the information, and then you've got to have the willpower to go pull a ballot box or to make sure that your school board is acting in the best interests of your community. So, with that being said, what do you have to say on closing?
Yeah, I'll say a couple things. First, if parents want to get involved, we are going to be doing a lot. We're going to have some meetings throughout the summer here in Kansas City. We're going to be looking to both inform parents about kind of what's going on, but also gather some input. So if you're interested, please just go to our website, which is qualityschoolscoalition.org. Again, Quality Schools Coalition, all one word, .org. And then you can find some information there and also sign up for our newsletter and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we, in this day and age, it is extremely important for our community to be plugged in digitally, to have accessible, easy to understand, high quality information. And I think sometimes that's a challenge, obviously. It's a challenge in a lot of ways, whether it's the digital divide or, the amount of low quality information that is out there also is a challenge. And everybody, everybody's an expert these days on something, and everybody has a YouTube channel about whatever they think whatever they think is important, which is why, organizations like Cascade Media, the Call Paper, who we know have been in our community, who we trust, who have been here for a long time, are extremely important. Digital, when you do have that access to digital media, it is one of the ways that we stay in touch. It is an easy, low-cost way to find information. So, it's extremely important that, we do have access to that, our community does have access, but also that they go to the right sources for the information and not,
I like that. I think that's appropriate on closing. You pointed out some key points. Is for the most part, it doesn't cost anything for our community to plug in if they know where to plug in.
Mm-hmm.
Just like they took the pay phones out, because everybody has a phone. So it's not nothing that costs you. Is do you know where the information is, and do you understand that that information is valuable, and are you willing to take the time to plug into something that can change your life circumstances, and especially with education, and if you're a parent, your kids' circumstances. So, absolutely. With that being said, as we say in closing, when you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself. Good night.
The program is brought to you by the Kansas City Business Association.